The Toyota Corolla has been sold in the United States for over 50 years. It is one of the best-selling cars in automotive history. Go into any mechanic shop, any parking lot, any commuter town in America, and you will find Corollas within 200,000 miles that are still being driven every day. The reputation for longevity is real. It is documented, it is consistent, and it is built on specific engineering decisions that Toyota made across 50 years of production. But the thing that most Corolla owners in the 2000 to 2015 range do not know is this. There are 3 separate oil specifications across that model range, and using the wrong one is not a small mistake. For a 2009 Corolla owner running 5W30 because it worked in their 2007 Corolla, the spec mismatch is not a preference issue. It is a factory violation that affects fuel economy calibration, emissions compliance, and in some engine configurations, the oil pressure that a variable valve system depends on to function correctly. That is the information gap that most Corolla owners in this range are currently sitting inside. Here's what you actually need to know by year. For Corollas built between 2000 and 2008, the factory specification is 5W30. Conventional or synthetic is acceptable in the older examples, but full synthetic 5W30 is the right call for any of these engines today. And a high mileage formulation of 5W30 is the better call for any of them with more than 75,000 miles on the odometer. For Corollas built between 2009 and 2015, Toyota made a mandatory switch to 0W20 full synthetic. Not a preference switch, a specification switch. The 0W20 grade was built into the fuel economy calibration, the emissions testing, and in some years the oil pressure requirements of the timing system. A 5W30 oil in a 2009 or later Corolla is not a conservative option. It is an off-specification choice that the vehicle was not engineered to run. That split at 2009 is the most important number in this entire video. And it is the one that sends the most Corolla owners in the wrong direction, because the engines look almost identical across that transition. And the driving experience does not tell you that anything is different. Here is why that decision matters to you directly and what it costs when it gets made wrong. A paid-off 2008 Corolla with 180,000 miles is not a purchase. It is an asset. When that car runs to 300,000 miles, the owner has effectively added years of transportation at 0 monthly payment. When that engine fails at 200,000 because of oil specification errors or deferred maintenance, the cost is not just the repair, it is the compounded cost of losing an asset that had 100,000 miles of useful life remaining. Engine rebuilds on these 4-cylinder Toyota engines run between $2,000 and $8,000 depending on the shop and the scope of work. A timing chain job on its own runs $1,300 to $2,000. The cost gap between an oil change done right and one done wrong, repeated over 50,000 miles, is not a small number. The other pressure that makes this decision more immediate right now is what has happened to motor oil prices in 2026. The Strait of Hormuz closure in February of 2026 cut off roughly 44% of the Group 3 base oil supply that feeds the premium synthetic segment in the United States. Prices at retail are up 15 to 30% above 2025 levels, and industry analysts have stated the market will not normalize before mid-2027. Toyota has issued rationing bulletins to its dealer service departments. Toyota Genuine Motor Oil is on allocation. Dealers cannot order unlimited supply, which means some Toyota service centers are already telling customers they cannot guarantee the brand of oil used in the vehicle's oil change. For a Corolla owner who has always relied on the dealership to handle this correctly, that guarantee is no longer automatic. Now here is the fact that most owners of the early Corollas in this range have never been told directly. The engine that Toyota used in Corollas from 2000 through 2006 had a documented oil consumption problem. Toyota was aware of it. There were class action lawsuits related to it in multiple markets. The issue is tied to specific piston ring design choices in that engine. In affected units, the engine will consume oil between changes at a rate that looks alarming. If you do not know, it is a known characteristic of the factory design. Owners who do not know this history sometimes interpret the consumption as a sign of engine failure and begin making decisions that accelerate the actual damage. They switch to a thicker oil, add a stop leak product, or avoid oil changes because they assume the engine is on its way out regardless. Each of those responses makes the condition worse. The correct response to this oil consumption issue is a high-mileage full synthetic formulation in 5W30. High-mileage motor oil contains seal conditioning agents that help restore flexibility to aging rubber valve seals and ring seals that have hardened from years of thermal cycling. When valve seals harden, they stop seating completely against their housings and oil gets past them into the combustion chamber. That is where consumption comes from in these engines in most cases. A high-mileage formulation addresses the seals directly through chemistry that standard full synthetic does not include. For a Corolla in this generation with 150,000 miles and any history of oil consumption between changes, switching to Pennzoil high-mileage full synthetic 5 W30 is the most targeted oil change decision that engine responds to. The threshold. Toyota mechanics most commonly cite for making the switch to a high-mileage formulation is 75,000 miles. Some recommend making the change at 60,000 if there is any existing seeping from gaskets or any consumption showing up between changes. The point of the switch is not that the engine is failing. It is that an engine that has been through enough thermal cycles benefits from the additional chemistry that conditions aging seals, cleans accumulated deposits more aggressively, and maintains oil pressure through passages that have built up some degree of carbon and varnish over time. One important thing to understand about that transition: if you are switching a high-mileage engine that has been on conventional oil for years to a more aggressive full synthetic, the stronger detergent package will begin dissolving sludge and carbon that has been accumulating. In engines that are mechanically sound, that is exactly what you want. In engines where existing deposits have been filling gaps around worn seals, the cleaning process can cause those seals to weep as the deposits are removed. This is not a problem with the oil. It is the oil doing what it was designed to do. But it means a high-mileage engine with existing minor leaks should be monitored through the first two changes when making the switch. And a gradual transition is the more conservative path. Now here's the piece that applies specifically to the 2014 and 2015 Corollas. At the end of this model range, and it is something most people who own these cars have never had explained to them. Toyota's standard variable valve timing system adjusts when intake and exhaust valves open and close. The 2014 to 2015 Corolla introduced something called the Valvematic. It also adjusts how far the intake valves physically open, the actual lift height, not just the timing. That is a mechanically more complex system. It requires an additional set of components on the valve train that operate through their own oil passages, and those passages are built to tighter tolerances than standard variable timing actuator channels. An oil that carries elevated base oil impurities or that produces heavy deposit levels inside the engine will begin restricting those passages before it causes any symptom that shows up in the driving experience. By the time a Valvematic system starts throwing diagnostic codes for valve lift performance errors, the restriction in those passages has typically been building for tens of thousands of miles. The repair, once it gets to that point, involves cleaning service or component replacement that runs $500 to $1,200 on these systems. An oil that keeps those passages clean from the beginning is not a luxury choice for a 2014 or 2015 Corolla. It is the correct protective choice for what that engine's most sensitive system actually requires. Pennzoil Ultra Platinum is built on a gas-to-liquid base oil technology. Shell starts with natural gas instead of crude oil and converts it through a chemical synthesis process into a base stock that is measurably purer than what is achievable starting from crude, even after the most thorough refining. Natural gas does not carry the sulfur compounds, wax molecules, or metallic impurities that crude oil brings into the process. In an engine where the variable valve lift system's oil passages are the most sensitive components, purer base stock and a cleaner additive package matter more than they do in a simpler engine without that system. Pennzoil Ultra Platinum. 0W20 is the specific product that lines up with what the 2014 and 2015 Corolla Valvematic engine requires. Here is the decision framework that covers every Corolla in the 2000 to 2015 range. If your Corolla is a 2000 through 2006 model and it has more than 75,000 miles, use Pennzoil High Mileage Full Synthetic 5W30. If there is any history of oil consumption between changes, this is not just a recommendation, it is the targeted solution for the factory seal characteristic that these engines are known for. If the engine is under 75,000 miles and consumption has never been an issue, Pennzoil Platinum Full Synthetic 5W30 is the right choice. If your Corolla is a 2007 or 2008 model, the spec is still 5W30, and this engine does not carry the factory consumption issue of the earlier design. At over 75,000 miles, Pennzoil High Mileage Full Synthetic 5W30 still provides real benefits through its seal conditioning chemistry and higher detergent content. Under 75,000 miles with no consumption, Pennzoil Platinum Full Synthetic 5W30 is the correct match. If your Corolla is a 2009 through 2013 model, the spec is 0W20 Full Synthetic only. Using 5W30 in this engine is an off-specification decision, regardless of what worked in earlier Corollas. Pennzoil Ultra Platinum. Full Synthetic 0W20 is the stronger option and is positioned for compliance with the newest certification standards that address deposit control and timing chain protection in modern engine designs. Pennzoil Platinum. Full Synthetic 0W20 also meets the specification and is the more affordable choice if budget is the deciding factor. If your Corolla is a 2014 or 2015 model with the Valvematic variable valve lift system, the spec is 0W20 Full Synthetic, and Pennzoil Ultra Platinum 0W20 is the specific recommendation. The purer base stock and stronger additive chemistry in Ultra Platinum directly address what the Valvematic system's tight oil passages require. This is not the same as the standard 2009 to 2013 recommendation, where either Pennzoil tier works. For the Valvematic engine, Ultra Platinum is the right call. If Toyota Genuine Motor Oil is unavailable at your dealership because of current allocation restrictions, Pennzoil Platinum and Pennzoil Ultra Platinum in the correct viscosity grade for your year meet or exceed the requirements that Toyota branded oil was contracted to satisfy. Toyota Genuine Motor Oil is a legitimate product, but it is produced by third-party contract manufacturers rather than by Toyota directly. A premium synthetic from Pennzoil that meets the same certification standards is a fully appropriate alternative when Toyota branded supply is constrained. Toyota built the Corolla to go the distance. The generation from 2000 to 2015 includes some of the most dependable internal combustion engines ever put into a passenger car. The earlier engine design, for all its oil consumption characteristics in some units, is a simple, robust design that rewards correct maintenance with longevity that most other manufacturers have never matched. The engine that replaced it starting in 2007 is one of the cleanest, most refined four-cylinder engines in its class. The Valvematic variant that came in 2014 is the most technically sophisticated version of that engine, and the one that most directly reflects what modern Toyota engineering requires from its oil. None of these engines fail early on their own. They fail when the oil specification is wrong for the year, when the formula is wrong for where the engine actually is in its life, or when the base oil quality is not matched to what the most sensitive components in that engine require. The Corolla that reaches 300,000 miles does so because every oil change across that distance was made with the correct viscosity, the correct formula, and the correct base oil chemistry for that specific engine. The miles are in the engineering. The job of the oil is to let that engineering do exactly what it was built to do.